So a buddy of mine sent me a game last week and said, "You're gonna love this. It's basically Genocide Simulator, but make it strategy." And look, normally I'd say that's a red flag, but I clicked download anyway because that's who I am as a person. The game's called Conquest, Steppe Empire. And before we even hit start, I gotta lay a stat on you that's gonna ruin your whole week. Somewhere between 8 and 16 million men alive on Earth right now are direct descendants of one guy. One dude's Y chromosome is just casually floating around in about 0.5% of the entire human male population. That's not a warlord, that's a biological event. That's a guy who outcompeted entire nations at reproduction using nothing but sheer terror and a horse. His name was Temujin. You know him better as Genghis Khan. And today we're finding out how an exiled kid with basically nothing turned into the reason your DNA test might come back a little sus. Beep, beep, boop, blink. All right, I didn't see you there, Rivet. You're my strategy advisor for this one, I guess. Cool. Let's just character creation. Oh, we're not creating a character. We are the character. Great, cool. Normal amount of main characterism for a Tuesday. Wait, difficulty select historical. There is no easy mode. Noted. Let's get into it. Okay, so apparently I start the game as a literal child, which weird choice, developers, but sure, let's set the scene, because you can't understand how insane this story gets without understanding how bad the starting conditions were. 12th century Mongolia is not a kingdom. It's not even really a country. It's a patchwork of nomadic tribes, Merkits, Tatars, Karites, Naimans, Mongols, who spend most of their time doing exactly two things: herding animals across brutal, frozen grassland and periodically murdering each other over grazing rights, brides, and old grudges nobody fully remembers the start of anymore. There's no unifying government, no shared army, no central authority, just a rotating cast of tribes stuck in an endless cycle of raiding, revenge, and re-raiding. Into this absolute mess is born a kid named Temujin, son of a minor tribal chief named Yasuge. And things are actually looking decent for baby Temujin right up until his dad gets poisoned by a rival Tatar clan at a feast, because nothing says welcome to the 1170s like assassination by horse hors d'oeuvres. With the chief dead, you'd think the tribe rallies around his son. Wrong! The tribe looks at this 9-year-old and goes hard pass and abandons him, his mother, and his siblings out on the open steppe to just die. No army, no horses, no status. Just a widow and some kids versus Mongolia in winter, which is somehow both the coldest and most murdery climate on the planet.
Starting resources, 0. This is fine.
Somehow they survive, foraging, fishing, scraping by on marmots and wild onions. And this is a fun detail. Young Temujin apparently kills his own half-brother over a fight about a fish and a bird, because resource scarcity makes people do wild things, and also because this kid was built different from day one. His mother reportedly lost it at him for this, and honestly fair. He gets captured by a rival clan at one point, thrown in a wooden collar like a prisoner meant to be paraded around and humiliated, and manages to escape, allegedly by clubbing a guard with the collar itself and sprinting into the night. He gets robbed, he gets betrayed, his camp gets raided, and his first wife, Borte, gets kidnapped by the Merkits, and he has to go raise an army just to get her back. Every single early chapter of this guy's life reads like the universe personally trying to delete him from history over and over, and just narrowly failing every time.
Party member kidnapped. Side quest generated.
And yet, every time he gets knocked down, he comes back with one more ally, one more alliance, one more debt collected. By his 20s, he's not just surviving anymore, he's building something. Here's where the game actually starts feeling like a game, because Temujin's whole strategy is basically speed-running alliance building. He marries strategically, he forms a blood brother pact, an Ando, with a powerful chief named Jamuka, his childhood friend, who honestly deserves his own tragic movie because these two start as inseparable best friends and end as the most personal, most devastating rivalry in Mongol history. Temujin does something genuinely revolutionary for the time. He starts promoting people based on loyalty and skill instead of bloodline. You're a shepherd's kid, but you're a genius battlefield tactician? Congrats, you outrank some noble's useless nephew now. This sounds like basic meritocracy to us, but on the 12th century steppe, this was radical, and it's also exactly why people started defecting to him instead of literally anyone else. Entire clans would just walk away from their hereditary chiefs to go serve under a guy who actually rewarded competence.
Recruitment event, loyalty over lineage, unlocking everyone who was ever disrespected by a noble.
One by one, the tribes fall in line, some through alliance, most through straight-up conquest. The Tatars, the same people responsible for poisoning his father, get crushed so thoroughly that Temujin allegedly orders the execution of every male taller than a cart axle, which is somehow both an incredibly specific and an incredibly horrifying way to commit a purge. The final holdout is Jamuka. The former best friend, now leading a coalition against him, eventually loses and is captured. Even here, the story insists Temujin offered him a spot back at his side. Jamuka said no, reportedly asking for a bloodless execution instead out of respect for their old bond. He got it. Some friendships just aren't meant to survive a succession crisis, I guess.
Rival defeated. No hard feelings. Some feelings. Medium feelings. By 1206, every tribe on the Mongolian steppe answers to one guy. And that year, at a massive gathering called a Kurultai, the tribes proclaim him Genghis Khan, roughly translating to universal ruler or oceanic ruler, depending which historian you ask. Not bad for a kid who was left to starve at 9.
Okay, so now for the part that actually explains how a handful of nomadic herders ended up conquering the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Because on paper, this shouldn't work. These aren't the Romans with their engineering or the Chinese with their walls and population. This is maybe 1 million people total, tops, taking on empires with tens of millions. The answer is that Genghis Khan basically built the most efficient military machine the world had ever seen, and every part of Mongol life had already been unknowingly training for war.
Unit type, horse archer. Stats, broken.
Every Mongol male grew up on horseback, hunting from the saddle before he could grow a beard. That's not military training, that's just Tuesday. So when Genghis organized his armies, he wasn't drafting farmers and hoping for the best. He was fielding a population where basically every adult man was already an elite mounted archer with 2 decades of practice, capable of firing accurately at a full gallop, forward, sideways, or backwards over the horse's rear in a maneuver historians actually call the Parthian shot. He also broke tradition by organizing his armies in units of 10, 100,000, and 10,000, cutting straight across old tribal lines. You weren't fighting next to your clan anymore, you were fighting next to whoever got put in your unit, which meant loyalty shifted from my bloodline to the guy standing next to me and the guy who promoted us both. Absolute genius for keeping a coalition from fracturing back into tribal warfare the second things got hard. Then there's the logistics, which honestly deserves more credit than the violence does. Each rider brought multiple horses, sometimes 4 or 5, switching mounts to keep them fresh, which meant Mongol armies could cover distances other armies just couldn't fathom, sometimes over 100 kilometers a day. No supply wagon slowing them down either because the horses themselves doubled as a food source in a pinch, and soldiers could reportedly survive off nicks of blood drawn from their own mounts on long marches. Imagine your army's ration system also being its cavalry. Efficient, deeply unsettling. Efficient. Logistics stat unreasonably high. Developers, please nerf.
Genghis was also weirdly ahead of his time on intelligence gathering. Before invading anywhere, Mongol scouts and merchants would map out roads, water sources, garrison sizes, and internal political rivalries months or years in advance. This wasn't blind horseback rage. This was, in a lot of ways, the most professionally scouted military campaign of the medieval world. And then there's the part that made them genuinely terrifying: psychological warfare. Mongol forces would deliberately let a handful of survivors escape a massacre, specifically so they'd run to the next city and describe in horrified detail exactly what was coming. Cities that surrendered without a fight were often spared. Cities that resisted were made into examples so brutal that the next city down the road usually just opened its gates without a fight. Terror, weaponized as diplomacy.
Reputation stat maxed. No one wants to find out what happens if you say no.
All right, Rivet, next mission. Apparently we're invading an empire that outnumbers us roughly 40 to 1. Cool, normal. Love that for us. Objective, conquer everything. Difficulty? Yes. First target, the Western Xia and Jin dynasties in northern China. This is where the Mongols run into a problem they've never had to solve before. Walls, big ones, fortified cities with populations larger than the entire Mongol nation combined. So Genghis does something very on brand for this guy. Instead of giving up, he adapts. He captures Chinese engineers, absorbs their siege technology, and within a few campaigns is deploying catapults, trebuchets, and even early gunpowder devices against the very cities that invented them. Northern China gets thoroughly wrecked, and the Jin capital eventually falls after a brutal multi-year siege.
Tech tree unlocked. Siege warfare. Borrowed. Not stolen. Okay, also kinda stolen.
But the campaign that really shows you what this empire was capable of is the one against the Khwarezmian Empire, a massive Muslim empire covering modern-day Iran, parts of Central Asia, and beyond, and honestly one of the wealthiest, most sophisticated civilizations on Earth at the time. And here's the wild part. Genghis didn't even want this war. He sent a trade caravan of over 450 merchants to open diplomatic and commercial relations, practically begging for a peaceful trading partnership. The Khwarezmian governor of the border city Otrar, for reasons that remain one of history's great "why would you do that?" accused the caravan of spying and had every single merchant executed. When Genghis sent ambassadors to demand an explanation, the Khwarezmian Shah had the lead ambassador's head shaved and sent back to Mongolia as a message.
Achievement unlocked. Worst possible decision in recorded history. Genghis Khan's response was not measured. It was not proportional. It was frankly, apocalyptic. Cities like Otrar, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, some of the wealthiest, most cultured cities on Earth at the time, full of libraries, universities, and centuries of accumulated art and science, were leveled, some multiple times over just to make sure nothing rebuilt. Historians still argue about the death toll, with some estimates for the whole campaign running into the millions. Entire irrigation systems that had taken centuries to build were deliberately destroyed, turning fertile farmland into desert for generations afterward. Regions of modern Afghanistan and Central Asia arguably never fully recovered. I want to pause here because it's easy to make jokes about a video game difficulty spike, but this part of history is not a joke. This was one of the deadliest military campaigns in recorded human history, and the trauma of it reshaped Central Asia and the Islamic world for centuries. The comedy stops for a second because the reality doesn't.
Okay, continuing. Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a campaign against the Western Shah of causes historians still debate: illness, a fall from a horse, or, according to one persistent legend, something far stranger that I'm not allowed to say on this platform. His body was buried in a secret, unmarked location, and the soldiers who buried him were reportedly killed to keep it that way. And the executioners of those soldiers were also reportedly killed in a security protocol that makes modern NDAs look adorable. To this day, nobody knows exactly where Genghis Khan is buried.
Achievement. Final boss vanished. No loot drop.
Chapter 5, The Sons and the Split. Here's the part the game conveniently doesn't warn you about. The empire doesn't die with its founder. If anything, it gets bigger. Genghis' third son, Ogadai, becomes the next great Khan, and under him, the Mongol war machine somehow gets even scarier, thanks largely to one of history's most criminally underrated generals, Subutai. This guy plans and executes a coordinated, multi-pronged invasion of Eastern Europe that's still studied in military academies today. Mongol forces under Subutai and Batu Khan smash into the Kievan Rus principalities one by one, sacking cities including Kiev itself. They split their forces and crush a combined Polish and German army at the Battle of Legnica, then, within 2 days, obliterate a much larger Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi. 2 decisive victories on 2 separate fronts, hundreds of kilometers apart, timed almost perfectly. At this point, Mongol scouts are reportedly probing toward Vienna, and European rulers across the continent are genuinely, seriously preparing for what they believe is the apocalypse.
Boss rush initiated. Europe, not ready.
And then, nothing. Oghedi Khan dies back in Mongolia, and by Mongol tradition, every Khan and general with royal blood has to return home for the succession Kurultai. The Mongol army, on the verge of potentially steamrolling into Western Europe, just turns around and goes home. One of the most consequential off-screen death saves the day moments in all of history. Europe was arguably saved from a full Mongol invasion by an administrative funeral.
Continent saved by bureaucracy.
The empire keeps expanding under later Khans, eventually becoming the largest contiguous land empire ever assembled, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf, at its height covering somewhere close to a fifth of Earth's entire land area. But an empire this size eventually splits into 4 major Khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, founded by Genghis' grandson Kublai Khan, who fully adopts Chinese imperial customs and even hosts Marco Polo at his court; the Golden Horde ruling Russia and Eastern Europe for over 2 centuries; the Ilkhanate governing Persia and the Middle East; and the Chagatai Khanate holding Central Asia. Same bloodline, 4 increasingly separate governments, 4 increasingly separate agendas, occasionally even fighting each other. So here's the uncomfortable part of the game's ending screen. Because the Mongol Empire is, by most estimates, responsible for tens of millions of deaths. Some historians put total figures as high as 40 million, at a time when the entire world's population was a tiny fraction of today's. Some regions of Persia and Central Asia reportedly didn't recover their pre-invasion population for over a century. By any reasonable measure, this is one of the deadliest chapters in human history, full stop.
And yet, and this is the part that makes it complicated, the empire also created something historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. With basically the entire Silk Road under one unified set of laws, currency standards, and protections, trade between East and West exploded like never before. Merchants, diplomats, and travelers could cross thousands of kilometers of Eurasia under relative safety for the first time in history. Marco Polo's entire journey to Kublai Khan's court only happens because a Mongol-controlled trade network made it logistically possible. Gunpowder technology, paper making, and printing techniques spread west, partly along Mongol conquest and trade routes. Unfortunately, so did the bacteria behind the Black Death, which many historians believe traveled west along these same Mongol-secured trade routes into Europe. The empire that leveled some of the most advanced cities on the planet also accidentally built the first real globalized network in human history. For better and for catastrophically worse. Final stats. Catastrophic body count. Also, accidentally invented globalization. Also, possibly the plague. Mixed reviews.
That's the whole horrifying, fascinating contradiction of this empire. It's not a clean villain story or a clean hero story. It's both tangled together, which is honestly the most historically accurate ending screen I could ask for. You start the game as a starving 9-year-old with nothing, and you end it as the reason a continent held an emergency prayer session. That's not a character arc. That's a warning label.
All right, Rivet, we did it. Empire built, world reshaped, several irrigation systems tragically not saved. Good game, weird game, historically horrifying game.
New Game Plus unlocked the Mongol successor states coming soon.
Oh, come on, we're doing another one of these? Fine, I'll play it. Thanks for watching, guys. If your brain just got rearranged learning that 0.5% of living men share a lot of greats, Grandpa, smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next chapter of this absolute fever dream we call history.